Okay, if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, I think you're really going to enjoy this video. What I did is I went back to some newspapers in 1973, right after Houses of the Holy was released, and found a couple of album reviews where some critics talked about their perceptions of the record. And I found some really, really interesting. There's one where the guy seemed to really like it, and there's one where the guy really didn't. And what I want to do is I'm going to read these reviews to you and get your feedback on which one you relate to more. You know, House of the Holy was a little bit of a pivotal album because they were coming off of what we know as Led Zeppelin 4. Of course, Led Zeppelin 4 wasn't called anything. It just, and as a matter of fact, it was so interesting what they did with Led Zeppelin 4. And it was kind of groundbreaking. It was actually really daring too. And it showed just how powerful they were in the music business, because what they did on Led Zeppelin 4 is they put no writing on the album. So, I mean, there's nothing on the record that tells you who it is. And it was kind of an amazing thing that they did that. You remember the cover, and it doesn't say Led Zeppelin, doesn't have a track list, nothing, even on the spine, nothing. And they did the same thing then with Houses of the Holy. It was just a graphic, and there was, again, nothing written on the record. And it was also interesting because it was the first time that Led Zeppelin gave the album an actual name, because of course you had Led Zeppelin 1, Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 3, and then you had kind of the untitled album, which is the one that came right before it. And then this is the first time we have something with a name, and it's Houses of the Holy. And they, coming off of what we know as Led Zeppelin 4, was a little bit of a daunting challenge when you think about it, because for some people, even today, what we know as Led Zeppelin 4, for many people is considered perhaps the greatest rock album ever created. Of course, that's the album that has Stairway to Heaven on it. You know, it has songs like Rock and Roll and Black Dog and Misty Mountain Hop. And I mean, it has such a variety of incredible music on that thing. And again, variety, because you go from everything, again, from something like Misty Mountain Hop to Rock and Roll, which has a real actual 50s kind of rock and roll feel to it, to Stairway to Heaven, which has this incredible movement through the thing. And then you even have something like, hey, hold on for just a second, we'll get right back to the video. But if you like this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we really, really appreciate it. Anyway, with that, back to the video. The Battle of Evermore, which kind of takes it in a whole different direction. So it is that Led Zeppelin 4 is truly a masterpiece. And so they were following that up. So Led Zeppelin 4 came out in 1971, and then Houses of the Holy was released just about almost a year and a half later in 1973. And then, of course, sometime after that, Song Remains the Same, the album, the live album came out, and it's named after, of course, the first song on Houses of the Holy, which is Song Remains the Same. And when you look at the track list on Houses of the Holy, they had a bunch of songs that ended up really becoming staples for Led Zeppelin. I mean, of course, Song Remains the Same. You had the Rain song, which was kind of slowed things down. And then you had Over the Hills and Far Away, which was kind of amazing. The Crunge, Dear Maker, you had No Quarter. Anyway, there was so much really cool stuff on there. But again, they were following up on Led Zeppelin 4. And so it was kind of a big, something of a challenge to follow up on something that was such a masterpiece. So I'm going to read these two to you. Love to get your feedback, see what you think about what they had to say here in these reviews. So this one is April 29th of 1973 from the Staten Island Advance, and it's written by a guy named Chuck Schmidt. And the article says, "Success fails to stunt growth of Led Zeppelin." The first cut on Led Zeppelin's latest album, House of the Holy, is entitled The Song Remains the Same. The song title, however, is somewhat misleading. Remaining the same has never been the case with Led Zeppelin. Change, often progressive, sometimes regressive, but always distinctive, has been a byword with this bundle from Britain ever since it hit American shores in 1968. And if Led Zeppelin has become famous for nothing else over the past 5 years, it has been its ability to generate consistently creative, exciting recordings and performances. House of the Holy is another step in this direction. After knocking a lot of people out with its last album, Led Zeppelin labored long and hard over Houses of the Holy, and the fruits are surely rewarding. The album is laden with strong, forceful members, as the first half of the band's name suggests, as well as some Zeppelin light pace changers. But the prevalent feeling on this album, and entwined in the aura which surrounds Led Zeppelin, is that scrolling back to the top here, the band is tighter and more together than ever. If anything, there seems to be a one-for-all, all-for-one attitude, and it shows. The band is no longer centered around guitar virtuoso Jimmy Page, although Page is probably more polished and sophisticated than ever before. Instead, the four members share equally in all facets of Led Zeppelin's total sound. Page leads blend perfectly with bassist John Paul Jones' lines in songs like The Ocean and Over the Hills and Far Away. Drummer John Bonham, as he has always done, provides solid, sturdy support from the background. And singer Robert Plant's wide range of vocal styles complements his three partners perfectly. On the rockers, Plant supplies stirringly high-pitched sounds which easily place him near the top of the current crop of English rock singers. And that's actually just a side note here. You do watch with Robert Plant's voice. And again, this is just a few years. In some ways, his voice on this album, if you didn't know, it's almost unrecognizable compared to a lot of the stuff that happened on Led Zeppelin 1. There is definite growth and adjustment that happens. I actually have a whole nother video on this channel, an article I found where somebody comments on his voice. But it is different. His approach to singing and everything in this album, a lot of it just comes across just different. He's changed in some way. So it's just kind of interesting to have him note that. But Plant, in a cut like the Rain Song, can also interpret slow pain blues with the best of them. Or, as Plant so aptly put it last year after Led Zeppelin's brilliant concert at the Nassau Coliseum, the spirit within the band is just fantastic. Many times a band skyrockets to fame, as Led Zeppelin did in 1968, on the crest of a new sound. The true test of the band's talent is reflected in what it accomplishes after all the fanfare has died down. Led Zeppelin has passed the test many times over, and Houses of the Holy is another in a long line of A-plus performances. Now, so anyway, that's an interesting take on the album. So we have somebody that really, really clearly thinks that this is a triumph, that they've done really well, they've grown, they've changed, they've have a great offering of songs here. And again, there is so much interesting variety on this album. But now I'm going to take you to somebody else, a different critic's take on this. And again, what I'm hoping you'll do is get your feedback, because I've had these conversations so many times with people where we go back and we discuss bands and albums and time periods, and I've known a lot of Led Zeppelin fans that really have mixed feelings about this album, where House of the Holy is seen as something of a disappointment when compared to Led Zeppelin 4. And I've known other people who think House of the Holy is the pinnacle, is where they really, really hit it. That was like the top. So, all right. So this one, his take, this is from the Berwyn Life, Wednesday, April 25th, 1973. New Zeppelin doesn't fly. I was sitting comfortably in Jeff's room, feeling really good, listening to some music when Mike walked in. As the stereo blared, Mike asked, "Who is this?" "Led Zeppelin," I replied. The next sound I heard was Mike laughing hysterically. Then we all joined him. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that's what your first reaction will be when you hear Led Zeppelin's new album, Houses of the Holy. At first, I thought that perhaps I hadn't given myself a chance to get used to the sound of the album because it is radically different from any other Led Zeppelin album. So I listened some more, and the sound got a little better. All in all, House of the Holy is a mediocre album, certainly the worst Led Zeppelin has ever recorded. The LP is like a baseball team that has a lot of potential but just can't put it all together. One day they'll hit but get no pitching. The next day it'll be just the opposite. House of the Holy is the same in a musical sort of way. On one cut, there'll be some good music, but the vocals won't fit. On another, vocals might be good, but the music won't be. On some, neither the vocals nor music is worth listening to. It's a pity that the album fails, especially since it starts so auspiciously with "The Song Remains the Same." But then, the breakdown of the first cut pretty well foreshadows what's to come. Jimmy Page kicks things off in a rousing fashion with a really inspired lead guitar intro. Unfortunately, the cut never sustains this torrid pace, especially when Robert Plant breaks into the lead vocal. Plant is one of my favorite vocalists, but his work on House of the Holy just isn't the Robert Plant that I've come to know. For some reason, Plant's vocals are much more restrained than on previous albums. And this is maybe a little bit, maybe what I was trying to say earlier as I was talking about this. Because, man, I tell you, when you listen to Led Zeppelin 4 and you get to the end of the song Stairway to Heaven, I mean, one of the things that makes that song the masterpiece that it is when it explodes into the end of that song and Plant comes in with, and as we wind on down the road, that the force that comes out of that vocal, I mean, there's just nothing like it. Jimmy Page tears into that nearly perfect guitar solo as it begins to rock, and then Plant's voice. And then Robert Plant actually has a lot of diversity on that album. I mean, Black Dog, he has the same power, but then you go to songs like Battle of Evermore, and he's got this really cool approach to how he sings that. And then Going to California. I mean, so he has this ability to do this really interesting variety with his voice, but there is something different about you don't on Houses of the Holy, you never really capture some of that energy the way you did in some of those previous albums. He just sounds different. Okay. And restraint is definitely not Robert Plant's style. On the album, he never really builds a song to its climax as he did so well in Stairway to Heaven. Okay. The Rain song is next and no better. In fact, if anything, it's decidedly worse. The strings on it reach the height of absurdity. Think of the background music of the schmaltziest movie you've ever heard, and you've got some idea what the strings sound like. All right, so I want to comment on this, though, really quickly. When he talks about the strings, one of the things we need to understand about this is they weren't really strings. What they were playing a mellotron, and at the time, the mellotron was a cutting-edge instrument. He's talking about the schmaltziness of the strings, and I never felt that way. And I didn't even know it was a mellotron when I first heard it. But when you hear it, it's strings, but it doesn't sound like strings exactly. It's got that, the mellotron has this eerie sound that sounds in some cases slightly out of tune and a little bit whiny almost. And it was so fantastic. And so when they put those strings in there, it didn't have, to me, a schmaltzy sound. It had a dark, kind of eerie sound to it, which I loved. And it all became, because it wasn't really, it's recordings of strings, but it's not really strings. It's being played on what was then a very, very cutting edge, interesting instrument called a mellotron. Okay, sorry for getting off on that, but I just wanted to put that in context. Let's see here. Think of the background music of the schmaltziest movie you've ever heard, and you've got some idea of what the strings sound like. Let's see now, as the camera pans over Paris. Over the Hills and Far Away, after a slow start, turns out to be pretty good. Plant's vocals on this cut are probably the best effort on the LP, and Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones get in some nice guitar-bass interplay. Yeah, and that is probably, I mean, Over the Hills and Far Away, for me personally, maybe it's in my top favorite Led Zeppelin songs ever. It's just so awesome. The Crunge, which ends side 1, sounds like another bad movie score. Plant's vocals consist of 2 super long run-on sentences. Jamaica is a put-on of 50s rock. At least I hope it's a put-on, because I hate to think that the group was really serious while recording this cut. To me, it sounds a little more reggae. Interesting, though, we kind of got that 50s rock out of it. The music on No Quarter is top-notch with some nice synthesizer work by Jones, but as the rest of the cuts, the group fails to put everything together. The Ocean ends this mediocre album in mediocre fashion. Jones is actually playing on No Quarter, he's playing a Fender Rhodes, I believe, which isn't a synthesizer. And maybe there's something else he's talking about in the song, but that's I believe he's playing a Fender Rhodes in that, which is a really cool instrument. I really hope that House of the Holy is put on. However, I have a suspicion that it isn't. If it isn't a put on, then it is an album that sounds like it was only half finished at the time of its release. For there is something interesting on almost every cut, but there is no one cut that is really good. The transitions within each cut are downright inept. In all honesty, the best thing about Houses of the Holy is the cover. So, and which is kind of funny because it's of all their covers, at least in today's world, it would be the most kind of controversial. You know what the cover looks like. It is, it's probably one of the reasons I didn't bust it out here is because the YouTube gods can be very, very funny about that stuff. And if you know what the cover looks like, you know, they can be funny about that. And so, but it was this organization called, I think it's called Hypnosis or something. And I think it's the first one that they put together for Led Zeppelin as far as the covers go. They'd done, I think, album covers for a lot of different people. And it was kind of definitely a very interesting album cover. Anyway, so there's 2 reviews. Houses of the Holy, 1973, Led Zeppelin's 5th studio album. And which one of those relate to you? Do you agree with any of the things that these 2 guys said? And how does that album for you personally, how does that rank? When you look at all the different Led Zeppelin albums that were ever released, where does that one fit in for you on where would you rank it? I'd love to hear about that. Anyway, hey, thanks for taking the time to listen to this video. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave your comments, obviously, and with that, have a fantastic day.